Welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast. I am your host, Alison Price, and I'm here with my good friend, Arwynne O'Neill.
Hi, Alison. It's great to be here again.
So nice to have you. Now, in this episode, we're going to be talking about the CADENT houses.
Yeah.
We have previous episodes about the angular houses and the succedent houses, and I'll put links below in the show notes, but this time we're going to be talking about the 4 CADENT houses. So the CADENT houses are the 3rd house, the 6th house, the 9th house, and the 12th house. And in general, planets in your CADENT houses are paused.
Interesting.
Whereas angular are present, succedent are pending, CADENT are paused. These are planets that are waiting for you to get off the couch and go and do something about it.
Interesting.
So energy in CADENT houses can sit there unused for a long, long time. We'll have a look at the 3rd house first.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get more into what we mean by paused. Because I think that's going to be a really interesting distinction to make between the energies that are just waiting for you to grab them in the 2nd house, those available on the shelf type of things, versus
the ones in the basement locked away.
Right. We'll definitely get into some examples about that. But for starters, we are talking about the 3rd house, which is the natural house associated with Gemini. So it's ruled by Mercury, and it is basically the house of communications.
Yes.
Yeah, house of communication. And it's about so here we're going to quote a bit from The Inner Sky by Stephen Forrest. He talks about houses. It's a great, very basic book, but he gives about the houses. He talks about what's successfully navigating those houses, a few keywords, and what is unsuccessfully navigating those houses. So if you are, living your best life in your 3rd house, this means clear, accurate, and unbiased perceptions, a willingness to tolerate perceptual ambiguity and uncertainty, and the capacity to probe the world for more information, either verbally or intellectually. So being open-minded, essentially. Open-minded, being an open book, being able to communicate, and more importantly, to be able to receive information and change your opinions when the world actually changes around you and when it's called for, as opposed to just being rigid and dogmatic and immovable.
Right.
Mentally. So unsuccessfully navigated, the 3rd house is the urge to protect a given concept of the world, leading to defensiveness, intellectualism, and verbal overkill. Scattered, unfocused curiosity, leading to chronic time wasting and disorganization. Which, that's the sickness of our time, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of overlap, I think, with kind of Gemini done right or wrong.
Yes.
In these
exactly.
keywords.
Is it gossip or is it information?
Right. Or propaganda.
Yes.
Yeah. That would be the chaotic evil, if you want to put it in D&D terms.
Right.
Right.
And why wouldn't we? Yes.
Right. Exactly. So it's the house of speaking, teaching, writing, your day-to-day communications, who you associate with on a day-to-day basis, people in your neighborhood, in your family, but not necessarily your family of origin, your sort of immediate circle. So that could be your roommates, it could be even your coworkers if you see them every day, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
I think this communication thing is that's quite a general term, but it's frequently is what you think about.
Yeah.
Where you're naturally meandering when you're daydreaming, you're going through this 3rd house to what you think about, really, because that's your 3rd house stuff as well. Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
So if you have planets there, you are more likely to have multiple things to discuss, hopefully, and therefore some good conversation, I would assume. And if you really don't have planets there, then you would look to the cusp and the ruler and so on. But you might be more not necessarily having, I don't want to say not having an original thought, that sounds crazy, but to be more swayed by others' opinion rather than your own. But when you've got planets in the 3rd house, you've got opinions.
Right. And it's interesting, too, because it depends on the planets and it depends on how if they're afflicted planets. Like I'm thinking of an example of if you have Saturn, for example, in 3rd house, and maybe it's on afflicted Saturn. Oh, God forbid. so that kind of person might be a very rigid thinker, or they receive information and then it's like they're proselytizing their opinion, and they're not easily moved by a good counter argument. They're dogmatic and they're just
stick to the rules.
We've all known people like that.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, absolutely. versus someone who maybe just kind of moves with the tide, and maybe Neptune in the third house is someone who, everything they hear like, oh, that sounds plausible.
I know, right? Oh, and beliefs are changing left, right, and center. Yeah. Yeah. This is it.
Or very persuasive
salespeople.
Yeah, gosh.
Mercury in the third house, you're selling.
Can sell you your left
Eskimos,
foot back to you or something.
I know. So do you have any planets in your third house?
I do. I have Jupiter.
How fun.
Yeah, that is a fun one. It's and also the North Node, which may be beyond the scope, but it's pretty great to have it in the third house, I think.
And I do see this in you because honestly, I think you're well read.
Well, I mean, thank you, but also I am really. I'm constantly reading. I always have like 2 or 3 audiobooks on the go. On my
You've
phone.
got a bookshelf to die for.
My bookshelf is amazing. I do readily admit to that. It's organized by color, which
and they
say, argue about in the comments, but I love it.
And let me tell you, in your personal library, if you have more than 1,000 books, you have a library, and I think you're at that point.
It might be.
Well, next time we see you, give us a count on your books because you certainly have some serious bookshelves.
And those are just the books I collect. Those are the astrology books, the art books, graphic novels that I just desperately want to have because they're beautiful. And most of what I actually read is audiobooks. And if you want to count those, we're well into the thousands for sure because I read at least one a week.
Right.
And I'm constantly reading. I mean, some people don't consider audiobooks reading, which is absurd because the oral tradition of listening to stories predates the written word by centuries, but whatever.
Right.
So that's my preferred method of reading books. And 95% of the books I read are nonfiction, but I'm constantly listening to them. If I'm out on the street, I've got my headphones on, especially in the winter because they also double as earmuffs. But if I'm skating, if I'm doing my workout, if I'm going to bed, even I set it for like 25 minutes or whatever, so it gives me time to fall asleep. And then I frequently will have to like rewind it to the beginning of the chapter the next day when I start over.
Oh my God! So what are you reading at the moment?
Oh my gosh, what am I not reading? Actually, it's interesting. I'm reading a couple of different things.
Do you read more than one book at the same time?
I do, and it's interesting because I have to have a couple of audiobooks on the go because sometimes it's a too interesting book to read while you're going to bed.
Yeah.
That I don't want to throw any of my books under the bus, but I am reading one that's it's called The Deadline by Jill Lepore, and she's a journalist, and it's just a series of essays, and each of them are about a half an hour, which is perfect. It's the ideal thing to listen to when you're going to bed because I'm not going to get confused about what chapter I was in because one will be about the Iraq, Gulf War. The next one will be about AI. So I'll know exactly what the topic was that I fell asleep to.
Right.
And, sometimes when you're listening to like a great giant book by some, wonderful author, you're like, where did I fall asleep? It's
interesting.
Yeah. So I have a like going to bed versus doing the workout book because sometimes they're good.
And I've got to say, this is Jupiter in the third house.
Yeah.
A multitude
yes.
Of books on the go, having read.
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you reading? 50 books a year or more?
It's more. Yeah. It's about that though. It's probably because sometimes I will. I mean, honestly, I do sometimes download books because I have this library app. It's so they're free, and if I can only imagine how much it would cost if they were all like from Audible or something.
See.
I get them from the library. So
this is Libby.
Yeah, Libby.
Okay.
I love it. Oh God, if you don't have that on your phone, I highly recommend
Jupiter third house. Download Libby.
Download Libby. Oh my gosh.
And what about physical books? Do you purchase them frequently or not so much?
Occasionally, not that much. And I usually get them from the nice local like used bookstore if I can, because it's not that I don't want to spend money on books, but clearly if I'm reading this many books,
kudos to you for even reading a book a week because
the last book the physical book that and it was a gift from my dad actually for my birthday, which he always asks me what I want, and this time I actually had an idea. Usually I'm like, I don't know, but this time I definitely wanted the Saga Compendium, which is a wonderful graphic novel by oh my gosh, by Brian Williams, and it's amazing. Brian K. Vaughan. It's a comic book. It's a graphic novel. It's full of sex and violence and drugs, and it's hilarious.
Just up your alley.
It's like Star Wars, but with more drugs and sex and violence than you can imagine.
Wow.
And when my mother came to visit, shortly after I had this book, I recommended it to her. And I got up the next morning and she had literally read it's like 1,000 pages. It's a massive tome. And she was already halfway through it. And she was like, well, I have to finish this before I leave after the weekend. And she did. Wow. So every time I left her alone for 5 seconds, she was reading this book. It's amazing. Saga by Brian K. Vaughan. Highly recommended. But yeah, so Jupiter in the third house. I could go on and on. And that is something that I say a lot. I'm constantly saying I could go on and on, which is Jupiter in the third house.
Yes.
In a nutshell.
You're not short of a thought, are you?
I'm not.
No, interesting.
And I blog and I do a podcast.
And you blog and you podcast, and here we go. And this is it. Planets in the third house.
It's hard to get me to shut up. Really.
Well,
I mean,
I don't know. We all have that at our own times, but Jupiter can bring excesses, and not that I'm saying you're excessive, but I admire you for reading any books in a year. I keep saying, yes, I might read a book this year, and maybe I do, and maybe I don't. I mean, the book I'm reading at the moment, I've probably had on my bedside for 2 years, and I kind of work my way through it now and again, but I'm not an excessive reader, no.
Interesting. Do you have anything in the third house?
I do, actually. I've got Mars and Venus. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about how that plays out.
Yeah, well, I do see the Mars actually as quite actively as the blogging, because I run 3 blogs and podcasts and continuously putting stuff out there.
Thousands of pages.
It's more writing than reading, right? So I'm not really reading a lot. I'm actually writing. I'm trying to take stuff that I know on my 3 different areas where I blogged and get them to be simple so that everyone can benefit.
And tell us how many books you've published.
Oh, yes, with Amazon. Oh, yeah, that's true. With Amazon, I've got now 40 books. And to be honest, and only probably, 5 to 8 of them actually sell. But it is a numbers game with Amazon.
So they're astrology,
crocheting, chess, art, colouring books.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm working on a Christmas book, which may or may not come to fruition.
Amazing.
But how to do it? Yeah, there's lots of things. Yes, publishing.
Yeah.
That is definitely what I'm actually working on, and I was publishing under a different. Anyway, it's a long, complex thing, but there's many ways to skin this cat.
Yeah.
That when you've got these energies, and not only do I want the content to be correctly put there, I also want it to be aesthetically pleasing, and there's the Venus.
100%.
To make sure it's lined up and that my pages are correct and my numbers are right and the font's good and it's not jarring.
Yeah.
Even my crochet pattern book, which is a book about how to put your patterns together, how to grow your crochet business, basically, and how to gather your thoughts with that, which there are multiple steps in this. You don't just crochet a hat and boom, you're done. There are ways to do it. And I'm putting step by step, and it's this kind of thing that I'm expressing through my third house. Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
Amazing.
Okay, so then moving on to our next cadent house, that would be the 6th house.
Yeah.
And generally the 6th house is about work, your job, your
responsibilities,
your health, and day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, so it's what you're taking care of as
right.
well. So it's your job, but it's also if you have pets or if you take care of children or the elderly in your home, plants,
yes.
If you have a garden, and it's interesting. This Stephen Forrest book says it's the house of servants, which is fascinating.
Oh yes,
yeah, and it's because it is the house of Virgo, which is the house of the sign.
That meant more
service.
in South Africa, where we did have a maid and a gardener. Yes.
Yeah,
but these days it also represents your pool guy or your guy who comes to clean your carpet. They're working for you. It's employees.
Yeah. Your employees.
We have Staff.
Yeah. So successfully navigated, the 6th house is about fulfillment through development of a personally meaningful skill that is of value to others. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. And it's unsuccessfully navigated. It's about endless busyness at tasks that have no personal meaning. Boy.
Yes.
Drudgery, wage slavery, humiliating subordinate roles in key relationships. Yikes.
You as an employee.
Yeah, those bullshit jobs. That's such a buzzword.
Yes.
I read a whole book about that.
That's right.
So many jobs that are just people. it's like
Busy work.
Chandler from Friends, where someone, like you tell people what you do for a living and they're like, what? You're a network? What? What does that even mean?
Yes.
And they're like, what do you do all day? And you're like, I don't know. I send off emails. I go to meetings. Yeah. And so many people.
That's what you do all day. Yeah, what you fill your day with, what you occupy yourself with.
Yeah.
And these days it's more, I think, too, about, how people have got morning rituals, evening rituals. That's 6th house.
Yeah.
And, morning rituals for astrologers. What do you do? Well, you check the chart of the day and then, I don't know, have some tea or something.
Yeah, that whole make it a habit thing. That's 6th house. Yeah.
What you have to do to prepare to get through your day.
Yeah.
For yourself, you've got to get things done and on a day. And if you do your yoga, good for you, and you're stretching or whatever you do. But I don't do any of those things. But, I do get up and have tea and then I have a moment. But that's about my morning ritual. That's as far as I get. I'm not jogging for 5Ks and then doing something extra.
Yeah.
But the evening ritual, I think, is more interesting because I do prefer to prepare properly at night. I want my kitchen clean before I go to bed. I want my bed turned down. I don't want clutter and stuff lying around. So it's that kind of thing. Whereas if you do happen to go to bed and you've left mountains of plates in the sink, that will kill me in the morning. So that kind of ritual.
I feel the same way.
Will get to me. Yeah.
Totally. And it's funny. It's one of the things that my mother, although she's a Sagittarian with Gemini rising, one of the very Virgo things that with my Virgo moon, I remember that she told me, instilled in me from an incredibly young age. And before I even was allowed to buy my first lipstick, which was quite young, looking back on it, but wash your face before you go to bed. And even to this day, no matter how much I've had to drink or how much fun I've had,
that ritual is built in.
It's very rare. That I do not scrub and. Yeah.
This is it. And so often these rituals are just things we just automatically do anyway, and things like that, which is fine. But
nothing is automatic. I mean, really, automatic just means you've done enough times that
you just keep doing
it without thinking. But but those things, you have to do them through repetition for them to become a habit, for them to become automatic. And that's the 6th house. Yeah. Is that drudgery that becomes involuntary.
Yes.
Because
that's what you do. Yeah.
Nothing is just involuntary.
Yeah. And it has to do with pets, right?
Pets and plants.
Pets and plants. So it's all animals smaller than a goat.
Right. Anything that's in your home that you can, that you take care of that would
your cats,
that would starve without you. Basically, that's the 6th house.
So if you've got planets there, you're more likely to have pets than if you don't. And plants and whatnot. I mean, I have plants. I keep killing them off. I've got this ivy thing. There's like one leaf left on it, but. It's hanging in there, but
God, someone gave me a succulent one time and they told me it didn't need to be watered. And I was like, great, cool. They didn't realize that we live in like the driest possible environment because we
got the air conditioning.
We have an HVAC system and windows that don't open. And I thought about this plant like literally a month later and I looked and it was desiccated to like, I didn't even believe that plants could look like this. It was like a skeleton of a plant. I felt so bad. It was like this aloe had like just turned into a fossil, like on the shelf. I was like, oh my God.
Oh, I definitely kill plants on a regular basis. This thing was flourishing before, and now there's like one leaf on it.
And we're pretty good with the plants now, but that was eye-opener. I was like, well, okay. Definitely not a hard rule that you don't have to water it.
Exactly. No. And then the 6th house regarding health, it's this is the health issues that you will recover from.
Oh, interesting.
Such as the flu, you'll get over it. A broken ankle, you'll get over it.
Yeah.
So it's things you're going to recover from. So any kind of illness you get that is in 6th house you'll get over it.
Yeah. So would you look for that? Like, what would be an example of something where someone would be like, do you have a lot of things do you look at the cusp?
Well, if you've got planets in the 6th house, whatever that planet rules in your body, say for instance you've got Mercury in the 6th house, then it's going to be your throat, sore throats, coughing, and lungs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And of course, clearly brain issues as well, eyes and ears, something like that. Whereas if you've got Mars there, you're more likely to get fevers that have to be broken, and so on.
Interesting. So I'm thinking that this reminds me, because we talked about just the communication in the 3rd house, and I had thought there's something about learning disabilities. There's something about dyslexia or having speech impediments or something like that. Where would you look for that?
Mercury retrograde.
Yeah. So Mercury retrograde or like a third house thing or possibly sixth house, because maybe it's something you get over.
Yes.
Something that you, through habits, can train yourself out of a speech impediment or...
Yes. So if you're born with Mercury retrograde, you are likely to take longer to learn to speak, read, write, and all the rest, fine motor coordination, all the rest of it. But by progression, Mercury will ultimately go direct by the age of 28 at the latest. Yeah. And hopefully if it's during your school years, then you kind of catch on and move forward.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, but, it shows you where you're likely to constantly, if you've got Uranus in the sixth house, you're more likely to bash your ankle because Uranus rules ankles. Really? Twist your ankle, crack an ankle, whatever it is, do all those things. So whatever planet you've got in the sixth house is an indication of where in your body your health is weak.
Interesting. Oh, well, I've got Chiron in there, so what's that?
Chiron actually doesn't have a body part, so
good.
Dodged a bullet there. Yeah.
Phew.
I know, right? So,
And I haven't ever broken a bone. I'm knocking some kind of wood
is that
as we say this.
Good.
I haven't, even with all my skating and...
Well, even,
I bruise a lot, like, don't get me wrong, but...
I mean, I've got no planets in the sixth house, but I mean, I've had the flu and I've had I've broken an arm or two. And things have happened, but nothing that's going to kill me. I've always kind of recovered. So
I had a friend in high school who, by the time I had met her, she had broken her nose 3 times already.
Well, there you go.
She was Sagittarian, though, so.
Yeah. So this is it. So these are the things. It's like your day to day. Oh, yeah, I got to take the dog to the vet. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I got to go and get that rash seen to. Oh, yeah, I got to buy groceries. Oh, yeah, I got to clean the kettle, take out the garbage. That's sixth house.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it's not the most exciting house.
No, but I like what Stephen Forrest said about skills. That is an interesting
skills. It's your house of skills, yes.
Yeah, because Virgo is not just about the drudgery. It is about mastering drudgery and becoming good at something, even if it's something that doesn't seem super exciting. It's not, winning tons of money in gambling, and it maybe not starting your own business, but it's mastering something. And as he says in Inner Sky here, I'm going to throw out another quote. In the sixth house, the house of servants is not just about servants, but it's about how we ourselves are the servant, not in a degrading or menial sense. In this house, we recognize an elemental human need, the desire to exercise competence and be recognized for it. Fixing a car, playing the violin, doing an effective astrological interpretation. The form that competence takes can vary widely, but if we fail to discover that special skill within ourselves, or if we fail to develop it to its limits, there's an emptiness in our lives. Something basic is missing. Mm-hmm. So how do we find that skill? And the answer lies in the sixth house. So signs and planets activated in this house indicate which part of our personality is best suited to discovering that. And they also give some hints about how that skill will look once we've polished it, educated it, and made it available to the world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So when you do have planets in the sixth house, that is in the nature of which you want to, and perhaps we're talking about with your Chiron there in the sixth house, it may be that, Chiron is frequently where we think we're weak.
Yeah. We think we're weak, but then we can turn that around into a strength.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have done that. You have turned things around and put things together. And, but it can be
from being shy and insecure to
it's the imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome as well comes in there.
Yeah.
But things have changed there. I don't think it's a natural. Yeah.
Yeah, like being Chiron is in Aries for me, and being an Aries type is absolutely not natural for me. But I do see that as something that I've through communication, through being creative, I've become something of a mentor in a way to some people, and at least an example. I've actually had women younger than me come literally running up and ask me really weird woman questions out of the blue. And that I don't know if that's a Chiron in Aries thing in the sixth house, whatever.
The guide, the guru.
But it's hey, we see you're doing this right. How does this work? What? And it's kind of neat. It's one of the good things about getting older, that you can kind of be okay.
But it's not a pushy planet. You're not just saying, hey, look,
I'm not hey, here's how to start your own business. Here's what to do in relationships. It's more I don't like to go to the gym either, but I do my stairs in the building.
You do the stairs, and we celebrate that.
Yeah, and it's something that's a little tiny bit of daily whatever that I can give as advice. You don't have to. My God, we're not all going to be great at sports. We're not all going to love being an entrepreneur, but But you can do little things.
Yeah.
You know, each of us is good at something.
Yeah.
You can find a thing to be good at.
How Chiron of you? You just say so. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
There's a place for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Ah.
6th house.
Okay, so now we're going to turn our attention to the third cadent house, which is the 9th house.
Yeah.
And this has quite a lot of stuff in it.
Yeah.
So we'll just go through a few of the main keywords for the 9th house.
Yeah, it's the house that's associated with Sagittarius.
Yes.
So its ruling, planet is Jupiter. And it's traditionally, according to Stephen Forrest here, it's the house of long journeys over water.
Right.
What?
Yes, overseas, going abroad.
Yeah, and it's also the house that, in a Sagittarian way, it rules higher education and
Yes.
the law. So educating yourself about other cultures, and
Yes.
it's also about religion, but not in a spiritual sense as much
It's
as
religious.
It's like the Hierophant in the tarot deck. It's about the study of religion and the being a
Traditional religion. Theosophy.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So the terrain. Okay, so successfully navigated, the 9th house is about the ability to break up routines and create new patterns of behavior. And it's interesting, we see that tie-in to the 6th house, but
Yes.
this is about more of an intellectual sort of thing. Clear individual sense of life's evolving meaning and purpose, and the capacity to absorb shocking, unexpected perceptions. Interesting. Unsuccessfully navigated, it's about the routinization of experience, boredom, rigidity of thought, dogmatism, opportunistic, narrow-minded, or unprincipled behavior, or nihilism.
Uh-huh.
So that intellectual seeker sort of
Yes.
gone wrong.
Yes.
The jaded sort of
Professor.
Yeah.
What do you profess?
Yeah, exactly. The long-winded, the lecture-y kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I see it as traditional religion, the religion you were born into, regardless of where you go as an adult, as opposed to spirituality.
Which is the 12th house.
Yeah. And, of course, travel, long-distance travel, which is these days, they reckon it's any further than you can ride on a horse in a day, which is 50 kilometres, apparently.
Huh.
A horse can go 50 kilometres before it drops on its, I don't know what. So, but, of course, any international border you're crossing, that's a 9th house travel.
Yeah.
So when you go to the States or you go to Mexico or something, that's 9th house. Whereas we didn't say the 3rd house was just local travel.
Well, yeah, it's in your neighborhood.
Yeah. So it's that, and so it's exploring other cultures and opening yourself up to, gee, is that what they cook? Gee, is that how they speak? Gee, is that how they wear their clothes?
Right.
And it's a culture shock.
Yeah.
Right?
Culture shock.
So that's all 9th house stuff as well. And what's the other one I was wanting to say about? It's the only house that actually has a career in it, and that's publishing.
Interesting.
So publishing is anything you're broadcasting is the stupider thing. So it's when you're putting stuff out there, obviously. Yeah. And just as a side note, when Jupiter last transited my 9th house, that was when I first had my first astrology article published, and I got paid.
Wow.
While Jupiter was going through my 9th house, I thought, there's something in this.
Yeah.
And yes, I've still got the article. I've pinned the magazine on my wall. But that was the first time I got published.
Yeah.
It never even occurred to me prior to that to even do it. So
interesting.
Because I thought, what have I got to say?
Yeah.
And apparently a lot.
Right. Yes.
So anytime you want to push stuff out there or broadcast or announce your stuff.
Yeah. Profess.
This is your, yes.
Yeah.
This is your 9th house where you're saying, hey, coming soon.
Yeah.
This and that, blah, blah, blah. And then ultimately that planet would perhaps then move into the 10th house, and that's when you cement it.
Yeah.
But you're saying, hey, we're doing this, we're going here, we're doing that. I've got this vision.
Right.
Anything like that.
Yeah.
Is 9th house.
Absolutely. That's really interesting.
Do you have any planets in your 9th house?
I don't think so.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
Well, I don't. I've got nothing up there.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop me being published. So
yeah,
it just shows you, or broadcasting. And though podcast, I think, is 3rd house, not 9th. But anyway.
Yeah. Because you do it in the comfort of your home.
In the comfort of your home. And
you're not going through a publisher.
Yes. We're not going down to the local recording studio. No.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we are controlling our own destiny with our podcast, which is what I like, and that's definitely 3rd house.
Yeah, for sure.
So anything you do at university, higher education, when you get a degree and you go to university, that is 9th house.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
It's a formal. It's like
tertiary
formality
education.
of it.
Yes.
Interesting.
Whereas the third house is elementary education, the 9th house is tertiary. So
and it's interesting. I have my south node in the 9th house and my north node in the 3rd house. So since it's always opposite, it's interesting to think about the story of and we haven't actually talked about the nodes that much on this podcast.
Not yet, but we will.
But yeah, it's always interesting. Evolutionary astrology paints a really beautiful picture of, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, whether you believe it's something, where you come into this life from with baggage from the previous and you're going on a sort of an evolutionary journey of the soul, or if you want to paint that in a different metaphorical language, that's what the North Node, and South Node journey is about. Is going.
So you've got the South Node, right?
South Node in the in the 9th house. Yeah, exactly. So it's
where
like
you're coming from.
It's like taking all of that knowledge and all of that cultural whatever and using it in the 3rd house, tangible.
Yes, where you're going. Interesting. Yeah.
So another little quote here from The Inner Sky is from an unsuccessful navigation of the 9th house invariably invokes mistaking a model of reality for reality itself. Maybe we are 18 years old and we put a picture of life together, but when we turn 30 and we're ready for a more fluid, more sophisticated picture, but perhaps our mind has become too rigid to change. We're addicted to the old model. We forget that it's nothing more than a picture that we carry in our head.
All right.
So from that point on, if we continue to adapt unsuccessfully, we can live in a world that we've outgrown, the mental world that we created when we were 18, and it's too simple for us. The old model no longer engages or challenges our intelligence. What was once a creative adaptation now becomes a mechanical routine. So successful 9th house navigation is about the art that we must constantly be renewed. To put it simply, we must learn to take chances. We must take leaps of faith, intellectually, emotionally, physically. We must intentionally move to break up our routines of behavior and thought, to make room for the inexplicable and for the miraculous.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's
the intellectually seeking.
Yeah, the preacher and the teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a nice house. You can explore it further. If you've got a lot of planets there, you're likely to get multiple degrees, universities and so on, and keep going with the education.
Yeah.
Or I ain't got no plans there.
Travel, cultural.
Travel. Yes, I have a daughter who's got 4 planets there, and she's constantly getting educated on X, Y, Z, and traveling here, there, and everywhere. And I'm thinking, really? Because I ain't got nothing.
The University of Life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at our final cadent house, and that is the 12th house.
Yeah.
This is the final house. It's the final house.
It's apparently the traditional name is the House of Troubles.
Ooh,
that's
the House of Your Self-Undoing.
It's like a TV show name right there, the House of Troubles. I would watch that show. Yeah. It's the house of Pisces. It's the associated planets of Neptune and Jupiter. It's the unstructured, unfocused, unconscious, and disruptive house. It's the house of ego death. And successfully navigated, according to Stephen Forrest, it's about self-transcendence, freedom from worry about life's ups and downs, spiritual and psychic experiences, meditation, and the sense of the presence of God or higher levels of consciousness. Unsuccessfully navigated, it's blurry, confused, uncertain self-image, escapism, abusive, self-destructive relationships with food, alcohol, sleep, sex, television, drugs, etc., and hypersensitivity, mental imbalance, schizophrenia, and chronic bad luck, in quotes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is the house that rules places of incarceration.
Yes. Yeah.
Prisons.
Hospitals.
Zoos. But also places of curation such as art galleries and museums where you don't own it, but you may curate it.
Yeah. You frequently stole it from another country and brought it to yours and put it on display.
All the stuff from Egypt and whatnot. Yeah.
Right.
So it's those places where and it's confinement. So, and it was an old-fashioned term, but when women had babies, they were in confinement for like a week after the baby was born because, otherwise they'd drop dead. But now, of course, we've got more drugs and we're all so much better off.
Yeah.
But it's when you withdraw from life to go and do something such as give birth or go to rehab or go to prison
Yeah.
Or
I mean, sometimes unwed mothers back in the day would have to be go to a convent to live out their pregnancy.
That's right, and this is 12th house stuff.
Not actually that long ago either.
Well, yes. So it's quite a tricky house. They call it the house of your self-undoing, where you're your own worst enemy when you've got planets here. Yeah. And of course, it's the house of your chronic health. So where 6 was house you're going to recover from, this is health issues that technically are going to kill you, and any planets or diseases you have there that are terminal will get you in the 12th house.
Interesting.
So I'm thinking of things like diabetes, where you have to take medication every single day. That's a 12th house thing. Yeah. Or malaria, which was a big thing in Africa. You constantly have to take medication.
Right.
And you never get over it. Yeah. That is a 12th house issue.
Well, and these days, tons of people are on psychiatric medications that they may or may not remember to or choose to continue taking. Or
this is it. Well, psych wards
may or may not even be necessary in some cases. The overprescription and the
it's to do with your unconscious life, your sleep, when you're asleep, when you're hypnotized, when you're under anesthetic or under the influence of drugs. This is all 12th house stuff. Yeah. So multiple planets there can indicate this type of thing, but not always.
Yeah. So would you say, so he says schizophrenia. So would this be the house of, I wouldn't want to say madness necessarily, but it's,
it's where
where there's a disconnect. Yes. Because a lot of madness is not necessarily, there are certain conditions that we consider schizophrenia or madness, where in another culture they're considered demonic possession.
Exactly.
Or you have to go through a ritual.
Yes.
And there's a great TED Talk.
Whirling Divas.
I cannot remember the name of the guy, but he's a theological student. Mm-hmm. And he went and he studied all these different places in different parts of the world. In one in Africa where they had to literally sacrifice a goat. What would be considered schizophrenic here, where you would just be medicated for the rest of your life, they do a ritual, the entire village is involved, and then you are cured, which is a very different way of looking at it from here.
And these whirling dervishes, anyone who goes into a trance. Yeah. And this is where you get things like mediums hearing messages from the other side, and the crystal ball readers, or wherever they're getting their messages, or clairvoyance is definitely 12th house stuff.
Totally. Yeah. And it's very much to do with your culture, because whereas something that could have been, you would be locked up forever back in the day, or maybe it would be considered, we get an exorcist or whatever. Now it's like, we'll just put you on drugs for the rest of your life.
Well, drugs itself is really 12th house stuff.
Yeah.
So these, anything that, if you don't take it, you're going to go to, that's 12th house stuff.
Yeah. And it's whether you take it, meaning a drug, or whether you take whatever society wants you to do, which is maybe be incarcerated or maybe be confined or
electroshock therapy.
Oh, yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. The prescription is it's a very 12th house thing, whether that's a place or something you have to take or something you have to do to exercise or to get rid of the...
Honestly, it's like the darkness before dawn sort of thing. We all kind of have it. You wake up and think, oh my God, my life's a mess. But then as dawn breaks, which is as it goes with the first house things. In general, most people get through with the 12th house, but when you're looking for particular issues, you would look there for them.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, having said all that, do you have any planets in your 12th house?
I have Uranus in the 12th house.
My goodness. So there you have it.
If you have to have something in the 12th house, that's not the worst.
No. It's what you do in private too, right? So, not that we need to know what you do, but in general, one would assume you keep a low profile on your astrology because Uranus rules astrology.
Yeah.
It's things like that.
Yeah, it's funny. That reminds me of this this one time I was at an office party about 15 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was a software company, whatever, But this guy asked me at some office function. It was like the happy hour party after on a Friday, and he says, "Do you know?" He says it like a low voice, like so other people can't hear. Do you know what comes up when you Google your name? And I'm like, I don't know, probably some astrology stuff. And he looks at me like shocked, like A, that I knew that, and B, was okay with that.
Yeah.
Wow. And that was 15 years ago. Like, I'm sure there's a lot more now. Yes. But it's like, yeah, I, kind of made the choice of like, yes, I'm doing that. And
Exactly.
I'm going to kind of have to be okay with it because, there's no separation of church and state. There's no, you can't have different, you can carefully cultivate a different persona, and you have to carefully guard that with your life if you want to keep them separate. And here's another interesting, just an example, which is actually kind of apropos because it was a blog called The Last Psychiatrist, which psychiatry is very 12th house. But he had a brilliant blog. And the way I found him was because I was researching a friend of mine who suffered from whatever kind of mental illness they thought she had.
Yeah.
She seemed very not crazy to me, but she was on all kinds of medication all the time. And I was researching these drugs she was on, and he was one of the things that first came up. And he was basically this irreverent voice kind of against the institution of psychiatry because it's just so corrupt and so money driven these days. And he was so honest, but at the same time, he was very secretive. You didn't know his actual identity. And there were some controversy about whether his actual identity, had been kind of unearthed. Like at some point he stopped blogging, and I believe that it had to do with his actual identity kind of coming to the fore. And he was one of these psychiatrists who got a lot of money from drug companies. Yeah. So he was taking money from drug companies, doing this whole circuit, but yet at the same time speaking out as like, quote unquote, the last psychiatrist, the last word, the voice in the wilderness or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and the reason this is relevant is because like what a 12th house thing, having a secret identity, being, but not a whistleblower, but like kind of like, I'm going to tell you the truth, but yet I'm also still profiting from it. It's like, yeah.
And going back to what you were saying a moment ago about the guy who was Googling you and saying, do you know what comes up when it Googled you? The fact that he's Googling you, or i.e. stalking you in the private, that is 12th house too.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose we all have a 12th house. It depends what's in it or how you deal with it.
Yeah.
If you've got planets there, you're definitely going to be coming up against these things.
Yeah.
But in general, we get through.
So what about having personal planets in the 12th house? Neither of us do, but...
like the sun or something. It makes you kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Not putting yourself out there.
Yeah. And even if you are, like there are celebrities, just the first person who weirdly comes to mind is George W. Bush when he was president. I know that was a big thing among astrologers. Like, oh, he's got a 12th house sun. What's that about? And like maybe it was about not...
We didn't know who he really was.
Right. Maybe Dick Cheney was really in charge or whatever. Yes. But yeah.
And stuff did come out over time.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not to say that you can't be a perfectly, above board person with the sun in the 12th house, but there is...
You're private. You're private, yeah.
Yeah, there's something that you are not always going to be front and center with. Your
I know an astrologer, a friend of mine, who has the 12th house sun, and they just don't push themselves forward as I do.
Yeah.
With my first house sun, because I'm saying, hey, this and that. Well, who does? Thank you. But even so, it's very quietly handled, and it's a private thing. It's a private house, so not everyone's going to be saying, oh, yes, I do this, or...
Yeah.
And astrology is one of those topics that is kind of fringe anyway, no matter what you say.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So, interesting.
Mm-hmm. So Stephen Forrest says about the 12th house, escape is the theme in unsuccessful navigations of this house. But now the escape takes a different form. Instead of seeking peace, we seek numbness. Instead of leaping through this window beyond personality, we stay right here, rigidly identified with our problems, but doing nothing about them. Instead of retreating temporarily into our depths, we seek to obliterate consciousness altogether. We simply try to turn it off. Traditional texts associate the 12th house with dangers of drink. Modern texts talk about the abuse of drugs, and they're certainly right. The alcohol and drug abuse, is about the failed 12th house, but it's also about partially obliterated consciousness. So this is the self-undoing we were talking about.
Yes.
It's not just about undoing in the sense of like, oh, you've messed up your life and now you're incarcerated, but it could be like a day-to-day undoing in the literal sense of like, I want to numb myself. I don't want to be here. I want, to be.
You're not living your full potential.
Yeah. Sleepwalk through life. Yeah. And he says, any intense, repetitive, compulsive behavior can potentially feed an unsuccessful 12th house passage. the obsessiveness that prevents any positive response to the troubles that pull the trigger in the first place. We are too numb to move. We feel crazy, disconnected, apathetic, or extreme. In extreme cases, we may be diagnosed as schizophrenic.
Mm.
Yeah. So
it's a challenge. It is a challenge.
Yeah.
It's, if you're looking at a chart, it's not going to be the first thing you're looking at, but it's going to be an underlining theme for people, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And if someone comes to you with, trouble, their life is unraveling, or they're, in a constant pattern of, as he says in Stephen Forrest, it's bad luck, in quotes, people who are like, why does this keep happening to me?
Yeah.
Then, they're looking to the 12th house. And,
and of course, if you've got transits going through the 12th house, it's going to bring all these things to the fore, right? Yeah.
But the great thing about that is that if something's transiting through the 12th house, it's going to come into the first house eventually, come into the light. You can own it. Yeah. You can emerge
into the light,
from the Shawshank Redemption-esque, out of the tunnel, into the water, breathing the air, walking down the beach, spoiler alert, etc.
Yeah. Tricky house.
Yeah, for sure. But everything can be integrated. That is the whole thing of astrology.
Yes.
That everything can be integrated if you are aware of it and you...
I think so. You don't want to focus in on one thing and say, oh, good heavens, I've got Saturn in the 12th house. No, I'm just going to be depressed for the rest of my life.
Yeah, no one has everything in the 12th house. It's not possible.
So, you have to look at the whole, and this is really probably the last thing you're going to look at.
Yeah.
It will be there, but it won't necessarily be dominating. There'll be way other more important things dominating than any planets in the 12th house. Yeah.
It just makes the story more interesting, maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
Everyone needs a dark night of the soul.
There you go.
Spice up the...
What keeps you awake at night? Well, that's it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. This reminds me of this meme, and maybe we'll link to it. Maybe I can find it. Something about just, being a Virgo, and there's this like 1950s couple, and the guy is sitting at the kitchen table and he's eating his breakfast, and the wife is standing behind him and she's got the phone in her hand and she says, honey, you've got to call. And he has this little thought bubble that says, I'm going to jail.
There you go. And do not pass go. Yes.
And who doesn't sometimes feel that way when the phone actually rings? You're like, oh God, who is it? Yeah. What do they want from me? They're taking me away.
It's true.
Yeah. Or if someone knocks, God forbid, on the door. Yeah.
All right. So we've been through the 4 cadent houses, the 3rd, the 6th, the 9th, and the 12th. We've given some thoughts about some planets in there and about how these, how you can navigate these houses and how to work with these planets in there. Mm-hmm. It's a much quieter place, and we will link to the angular and the succeeding houses as well.
Yeah.
So if you have found value in this episode, please do consider sharing it with somebody else. And if you'd like to get in touch with me or Arwynne, you can email us at starzology@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Well, thank you once more, Arwynne, for being here again today. It's been lovely having you.
It's been great to be here. Thank you, Alison.
Thanks
for listening.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the 2 main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer, or someone who's learning astrology, or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.